The day I stopped going camping on my own was the day that I almost lost my leg. It all started off as a great weekend. I had decided to go camping from Friday evening to Sunday afternoon and maybe do a bit of fishing. Both Friday night and Saturday morning went off without a hitch. I set up camp and enjoyed a nice fire on Friday night. And then I went fishing early Saturday morning. I didn't have much luck on the water, but the weather was beautiful and the forest was alive around me, with small critters and deer roaming around. Little did I realize, it was also bear season. I returned from the river early Saturday afternoon, and on the walk back I noticed what looked like an animal trail that I was interested in. My plan was to eat some lunch and then go for a nice hike to see what sort of animals I could see. Right away I could tell that there had been bears traveling that path throughout the season. There were scratch marks along with some tufts of fur left on some of the trees that I passed. But lucky for me, there were no signs of actual bears. Just some cool sights to look at. Now, one thing that most avid hikers will tell you, especially when you're walking around terrain that is relatively new to you, you should always keep your eyes on the ground and watch your step. My mistake was that I was too curious about the bear markings on the tree and didn't notice what was resting on the ground right in front of me. I took a step forward with my right leg and my foot hit what I thought was the forest floor. I heard the sound of metal banging together and felt an excruciatingly sharp pain run through my leg. I screamed as I fell to the floor and looked toward my feet to see a large metal bear trap had locked itself around my ankle. I couldn't see through my pant leg, but I could be almost certain that my leg was broken, and moving it was far too painful. I looked around for anything that might help me out of this situation, but there was nothing nearby. I could feel my ankle getting warm as it throbbed with pain, so I tried to pry the trap off with my hands, but there was no way I could get the leverage to do so in my position. I was stuck, unable to move, and with no one to call for help. Though time felt like it stopped around me, daylight faded quickly. There was no chance of me sleeping through the night with the pain that my ankle was in, and slight movement was enough to make me shriek. Eventually, the morning came, and with the sounds of wildlife, I was terrified when I heard the sound of something walking in the distance. I probably wouldn't have even noticed it if it had not stepped on a branch or twig and broke it, but when I looked over, I could see that there was clearly a medium-sized brown bear heading down the game trail toward my position. I don't think it knew what I was right away, or if it even noticed me, but I was horrified. Thankfully, I didn't have to find out its agenda because the sound of a single gunshot scared the beast away and sent it running in the opposite direction. I looked in the direction of the gunshot and noticed an elderly man with a rifle in his hand making his way toward me as fast as he could without toppling over. As soon as he was next to me, he began apologizing. It turned out that I stumbled into a trap that he had set earlier that weekend. He helped me out of the trap and then gave me a ride to the hospital where they had to set my leg and give me a cast. The man was very apologetic about the entire thing, but I assured him that it wasn't his fault. It was an accident, and I should have been paying more attention. I'm just glad that he showed up and got me out of the trap when he did. It was about 5 years ago when I was out on a date with my wife, who at the time was my girlfriend. We had decided to spend our 4-month anniversary on a cheap date that consisted of us having a picnic by our favorite lake, watching the sun go down, and then staring at the stars for a few hours. It started out as one of the best nights of our lives, but sadly, it turned into one of the scariest, at least in my opinion. Everything about the date was going perfectly. We were having a lot of fun, and even though the sun had gone down, the sky was so clear and bright thanks to the size of the moon and all the stars. It was the sort of thing that you didn't want to end. But as the night went on, we both knew that we had to head back to our car and head home. So eventually, that was what we did. We gathered all of our things and began walking along the dark trail, using only the moonlight to see what was ahead of us. We both made our way down the trail, hand in hand, trying to both seem happy and calm, though I'm pretty sure that the two of us were both feeling a bit scared. I mean, once the magic of the night faded, we were both just walking through the woods in the middle of the night. Who wouldn't be a bit on edge? But neither of us wanted to show it, so we both just put on a brave face and continued talking as we walked back to the car. We had made a decent distance, and honestly, I had sort of forgotten about the creepy situation that we were in and went back to enjoying myself. However, that was when Amy, my girlfriend, began to squeeze my hand tighter. When I asked her what was wrong, she said she felt like someone was watching us. I was trying to stay strong and began telling her that the odds of that were really slim and that we were fine. But when we looked around us, we both simultaneously realized that I was wrong. As we looked over to our left, we both froze as we noticed that a silhouette of a man that had been illuminated by the bits of scattered moonlight that were leaking through the treetop canopy around him. Amy screamed as she noticed him walking toward us, and I told her that she needed to run as fast as she could to the car and I would follow behind her. The both of us took off running, and I kept periodically looking back toward the man to see if he was following us. To my surprise, he made his way onto the trail and then just stopped in the center of it and stared in the direction that Amy and I had been running in. Thankfully, we both made it back to the car and quickly drove away from the head of the trail. The entire car ride home was full of panic and curiosity as to what that person was doing out there and why they were following us but didn't chase us. The two of us talked about what we should do and ultimately decided not to call the police at first because technically we didn't see anything illegal happening. For all we knew, it might have just been another hiker or something, and we just let the ambiance scare us. Our opinion on the matter changed a few weeks later, however, when a body was discovered off the trail just a short distance away from where Amy and I had our picnic that night. The two of us decided that we needed to tell the police about what we saw that night and let them know about the person who was following us. It's still unclear if the two incidences were connected, but the more I think about it, the more I feel like we were almost witness to something that caused the man in the woods to follow us. Who knows what would have happened if we didn't notice him walking toward us that night. My entire life, I had been a fan of going on long hikes or camping trips. No matter what I was doing, I loved being around nature. That was why, when I had finally gotten my license and was able to travel long distances to go on some of the most amazing hikes you will ever experience, I didn't miss a beat. However, that all came to an end when I ended up needing to get my foot amputated from the ankle down. Honestly, the only thing I really miss doing that I can't do anymore is those long hikes, which incidentally was the cause of my injury in the first place. It all happened on a breezy summer day when my friend and I decided to go for a hike along a trail that we had read about that supposedly passed by various waterfalls and caves. The reason we had never gone before was that the trail was about 3-hour drive from our houses, but the weather was perfect and we had nothing to do that day, so it seemed like the perfect time to finally check it out. And at first, it was just as beautiful as you would imagine. The foliage was nice and blooming. The shade from the trees made the heat more bearable, especially with the nice breeze that was rolling through, and the birds were being loud and proud with their music. It was truly blissful, which is probably why I wasn't paying much attention to where I was walking. It was about an hour and a half into the hike, and we had passed by a few of the falls that we had heard about, and even spent some time cooling off in one of the small pools underneath one of them. And at the time, we were considering taking a small break and eating some lunch that we had packed for ourselves. But just as we had begun to make our way over to the small formation of rocks, we heard a terrifying rattling sound. The two of us froze in place as we recognized the sound of the rattlesnake. But even as we both were looking around at our feet, we couldn't find it. We both began talking to one another, trying to figure out how we should get away from the area as safe as possible without knowing where the snake was. And I swear the entire time we were talking, it was as if the rattling noise was getting more and more aggressive. We continued to look around us, but couldn't see any sign of the snake, and eventually we decided that we should walk back away from the rocks the exact way that we came toward them, and hopefully we would be fine. Sadly, we were mistaken. We couldn't see the snake because apparently I had stepped right over the top of it, and it was nestled right behind the back of my right foot. When I lifted my foot to begin stepping backward, I felt the sharp sting of the snake's fangs dig into the back of my exposed ankle. I screamed as I flicked my foot forward, throwing the snake to the side. My friend quickly grabbed me by the shoulders and ushered both of us in the opposite direction of the snake. But once we were away, we knew that we didn't have much time. As someone who enjoyed the outdoors, I was somewhat prepared for the situation, meaning that I knew what we were supposed to do until I could get help. I calmly told my friend to call the hospital and inform them of what happened and that I had been bitten by a rattlesnake. That way they could have the anti-venom handy when the ambulance met us at the head of the trail. Then what I thought I should do next was to cut off the blood flow from my ankle to my leg in order to slow and hopefully stop the spreading of the venom. I'm still unsure if that was the right thing to do or not, as some say that the tourniquet is why my foot ended up getting so bad in the first place. However, I was no expert. I simply cut off the flow of blood using the belt that I had been wearing, and then after supporting me on his shoulder, my friend and I began hobbling back toward the entrance of the trail. We were moving very slowly by the time another group of hikers found us, and thankfully they offered to help us out and carried me out of the forest. By the time I could see the first responders walking down the trail, I was elated. At that point, my foot felt as if someone was building a fire inside of it, and it was burning from the inside out. It was so discolored that I could tell by the first responder's face that things weren't going to be good. Thankfully, they administered the anti-venom and my life was no longer in danger. However, the same couldn't be said for my foot. Back at the hospital, it was determined that the tissue damage to my right foot from the ankle down was too extensive, and the best course of action would be amputation. It's been 5 years since I lost my foot on what was supposed to be a peaceful hike through the forest. All I can say is that I'm glad to be alive, but I sure do miss those times being out amongst the trees. So the next time you find yourself out in the woods, make sure you are watching everywhere that you step.